if we look at the survey results in general, it shows that people are still veering towards known technologies.
Welcome everyone to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name's Nate Nelson. I'm here as usual with Andrew Ginter, the Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. He's going to introduce the subject and the guest of today's show. Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Nate. Our guest today is Serkan Yusuf. He is a principal security consultant at Applied Risk. And his topic is a report that Applied Risk just published, Architecting the Next Generation for OT Security. Hello, Serkan, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, can you say a few words about yourself and about the good work that you're doing at Applied Risk?
Yes, of course, and thanks for having me on, Andrew. So first up, a little bit about me. As you already mentioned, I'm a principal security consultant with Applied Risk. I've over 25 years of experience in the automation and control sector, with 10 years specifically in OT security. Over the years, I've been really fortunate to have led multiple OT security engagements which have covered the full spectrum of activities, really, from risk assessment and identification through to design, remediation, and run and maintain programs of work. These engagements that I speak of have been spread across multiple industries, the main ones being oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, pulp and paper, and building controls and management. I genuinely enjoy what I do, and I genuinely mean that. And I like to contribute to the OT security community by speaking at conferences or hosting webinars as such. I like writing blogs and knowledge sharing. I also conduct OT security training to audiences ranging from engineers through to C-level executives. So that's me. If I may, a quick overview about Applied Risk. So our roots are purely in OT security. We specialize solely in this domain, which is something we're all very proud of and passionate about. We serve customers across multiple sectors, including renewables, manufacturing, oil and gas, maritime, pharmaceuticals, defense, etc., etc. We're very fortunate as a result to have a very diverse client base. We work with a range of organizations from small all the way through to global industry majors. We also recently became part of the DNV family, so there's a lot of excitement for that and the direction we're heading in for 2022 and beyond. Our portfolio currently spans three main areas. The first one we call foundational services, which is where we provide more traditional security services to clients like risk assessment, assurance, technical design, review and improvements, penetration testing, etc., etc. The second area is research and innovation, where we're actively looking at the threat landscape to understand trends better. The landscape we look at is across our clients and across the industry. The output of that is more agile and forward-looking services and solutions aimed at meeting the changing needs of our clients. The third area we like to call Secure Future, which is where we're actively looking to share our knowledge through platforms like the report we're talking about today, and also through events we regularly host, from webinars through to high profile and industry recognized events like the Night Watch.
You folks have a new report out at Applied Risk. Can you tell us about your report? Can you give us some of the background or the highlights of the report?
Yeah, sure thing. So the report, as you mentioned, is called Architecting the Next Generation of OT Security, and it's based on data compiled by the Ponemon Institute's survey of more than 1,000 IT and OT security practitioners. On top of that, we've also added insight from Applied Risk's engagements and assessments over the last 12 to 18 months. Thanks to our wide-ranging client base, we have a quite a big data set to also pull upon and to also layer upon top of the data. So what that means is we've taken the results from the survey, we've analysed it in-house, and subsequently we've been able to gain a great insight into what the survey respondents feel about the current state of OT security. And then secondly, questions were also asked that were more forward-looking. In other words, where do people see OT security heading over the next 2 to 4 years? The end result is a 34 pages to be exact, report with findings, trends, and practical recommendations for the industry. We found the results very insightful, and we hope others will too.
Let's start at the beginning. The top priority that the survey identifies, for cybersecurity at physical operations, the top priority is continuous operations. Now, I find this very strange because in my experience of visiting power plants and other critical infrastructures, the number one priority is safety. Don't kill anyone. Don't cause an environmental disaster. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to set foot on some of these facilities until I had taken safety training and been tested and proven that I understood the safety training. Do you have any idea why the number one priority in the survey is reliability, not safety?
Yes. So to clarify, the question in the survey related to the business driver to invest in OT security. So the question was asked, what is the biggest business, the highest business driver for OT security as such? So let's make it clear, so no one is misinterpreting the result, or no one is deprioritizing safety as such. So in our experience, like yourself, safety is always front and center. So essentially, we've treated safety as a given for our survey base. So on that assumption, and in relation to the question asked about business driver, our respondents were presented with multiple choice options to pick from, formed from common themes we hear from our client base. And safety wasn't one of them because it was an assumption as such. So I don't think it's a surprise that maintaining system availability is the joint highest received response. But what was interesting to us was the focus on compliance being driven by regulations and standards. And I think this is the one to watch and aligns with what we're seeing ourselves with more and more clients, particularly those in Europe, coming to us for help in order to meet regulations. As way of an example, the IT Security Act 2.0 in Germany, it's driving operators of critical infrastructure to not only get the policy and procedural basics in place, an information security management system framework, for example, but also it's the technology capabilities are also now being mandated by that regulation. So I think we will see the evolution of regulatory requirements driving more and more companies to run OT security programs, and the results of that survey will change accordingly. And I see standards and regulations being driven up to the top of the list nearly for the primary motivators.
So that's interesting. I mean, I'm only familiar with a couple of the European standards. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. So the one I mentioned in my explanation there is the IT Security Act 2.0, and it's German legislation that it has basically been born out of the NIS EU directive as well. So the German government are very proactive in this response, in their response to cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. In fact, they're probably the most stringent in Europe, and they're pushing ahead with various laws and regulations now, which is putting the onus on operators of critical infrastructure to essentially do more to secure those operations. And as mentioned, even they're mandating technology-based solutions now. I think the actual technology requirement that's been mandated for the German IT Security Act is an attack detection system as such. So they're effectively mandating a logging and monitoring and essentially like a SIEM-based solution. I also just wanted to correct myself, as I believe I said that the IT Security Act was born out of the NIS EU directive. Apologies for that, I'm getting muddled up. It's actually being driven by the BSI, which is the Federal Office for Information Security in Germany.
Andrew, I'm just curious, in the EU, are most regulations applied at the state level or at the EU level?
It's a little bit trickier than that. I'm not an expert on the European regulatory environment, but in my dim understanding of it, a few years ago, there was an order came out. I think it was called an NIS order. I don't even remember what it stands for, but it was an order from the European Union to the member states to produce cybersecurity regulations for their jurisdictions for critical infrastructure. So that order came out, and then it took a couple of years, and the member states, some of them were already, far along the path towards doing it. Others needed to get started on it. But a few years later, all of the member states had regulations, cybersecurity regulations for their critical infrastructures. That's my understanding of how it works in the critical infrastructure space. There's not union-wide regulations, but there is sort of the regulations are motivated. There's sort of a common motivation for the regulations, but then each of the jurisdictions puts together their own rules.
I think where my curiosity lies is mostly with larger corporations that might apply across states. You have factories here, and here, and suppliers here and here. I figure it could get a little bit confusing in a way that companies operating in America don't have to deal with.
You're right and you're wrong. You're right in that it gets confusing because you have all these rules you have to follow and different rules in different places. You're wrong in a sense that the American corporations don't have to do this, even if there's sort of one cybersecurity regulation like NERC-CIP that applies. There tend to be lots of other standards that have to come into place. I mean, NERC-CIP deals mostly with industrial security, but leaks into IT when industrial systems depend on certain IT systems. In the IT space, there's also PCI, which is the payment card, credit card rules. There a lot of places are ISO 9000 or not 9000, ISO 27000 certified, which is an IT grade security certification that has implications. Basically, there's standards, there's regulations everywhere. They interact. This is, in my understanding, this is in a sense, a constant problem for pretty much everyone, everywhere of any kind of significant size.
Back to the report. I was looking through the findings. There was a question in the report about threats, and it seemed clear in the responses that the people responding to the questionnaire, they were worried just as much about insiders as they were about outsiders. Insiders with passwords, trusted people, as opposed to the ransomware groups and whatnot who are coming at us from the outside. Can you talk about this? Because in my experience, these industrial sites, they tend to have employees they trust a lot. These people are working in safety critical environments. They, in a sense, they trust each other with their lives. The employees tend to be extremely loyal. What's going on here? Is this, again, are we talking about a different industry, a different geography, or is it that it's errors and omissions we're worried about so much more so than malicious activity?
Yes, so to clarify for the listeners, the question asked in the survey was aimed at identifying the top cybersecurity threats that may affect critical operations as such. So as you mentioned, the highest risk measured was for unauthorized remote access. So with that in mind, we believe that the response that we received has largely been driven by the rapid implementation of remote access to OT environments over the last 12 to 18 months. I think there's no doubt that COVID-19 has driven this acceleration, and we know from, unfortunately, what we've seen out in the field that sometimes this capability isn't always implemented in an ideal way. In an ideal way from a security perspective. So to answer your question on trust, I think we have a number of factors at work driving this particular threat up the scale. I don't think it's not the organizations that don't trust their employees, but it's more of a case of, I think people are recognizing that there is a stronger potential nowadays for a cyber incident via a compromised remote user account or poorly implemented security controls associated with it. Essentially, with the prevalence of IT/OT convergence and more connectivity and accessibility into OT environments, the attack surface essentially it's getting bigger as such. So I think it's just recognition of that.
Another finding that I found surprising was that identity and access management was recommended, so strongly as a security measure because, against outsiders, the bad guys steal passwords. What good is a strong password policy if the bad guys have stolen the password? identity and access management seems more like a speed bump to some of these advanced ransomware groups. But it was, it seemed to be the number one or a very highly ranked mitigation among the survey respondents. Can you talk about that? Is that related to this remote access insider thing?
Yes. A simple answer is yes. With regards to that recommendation, that's why it was made. I think as we see more and more convergence of IT/OT, more connectivity, more ways to access environments and its data, and I think organizations are really going to need more scrutiny and control on logical access that goes beyond the capabilities of like a traditional network domain solution. So if we look at a modern IAM solution, they go beyond the simple credential managements that you mentioned there, and they include technologies like AI and machine learning that can identify and basically block anomalous or suspicious activity as such. So from an insider threat perspective as well, IAM can limit the damage caused by a malicious insider, and that's by ensuring that users only have access to the systems that they work with, and they can't escalate their privileges without the necessary supervision and authorization as such. I would caveat this though, and say that this is an emerging and maturing technology within the OT space, so it's not something that you can just pick up and install into OT and expect it to work as such. There is work and processes that go around it and making sure it integrates and you get the value out of it, of course. And with any new solution, you need to be sure that it's sustainable and can be supported by your organization as well. But it's certainly a solution that's prevalent within the IT environments, very very much so within financial sector, fintech, etc. So we're seeing more and more queries and also clients asking about it from the OT space and how the benefits that it can offer can also help them within OT.
So Nate, part of why I'm surprised here is sort of some classic issues with dealing with passwords on the OT side. I mean, a classic example is shift change. If I, have a refinery with 17 operators in it and it's, shift change, the new operator comes in, taps the old one on the shoulder. Classic sort of IT security best practice says the old operator should log out of the workstation, take down all of the displays on all 17 screens. The new operator should sit down at the workstation, be challenged with a password prompt, log in, prove they are who they are, and bring up all 17 screens again. The problem is that this takes time. What is a refinery? We have hot, pressurized hydrocarbons flying all over the place. And, when we take down the screens, when the old operator logs out, that takes tens of seconds or longer. Now all it takes is for the new operator to fumble finger the password a couple of times and take, half a minute to log in, and then another 2 or 3 minutes to bring all these screens back up and populate them all with data. We're flying blind for going on 5 minutes here. This is illegal in some jurisdictions. It's certainly against policy in just about every refinery I've been in. You cannot fly blind for, with these dangerous physical processes for more than, a handful of tens of seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 40 seconds. And so, passwords are tricky on OT networks. And that's just one example. There's many places where you have to be really careful with passwords. So the finding that people are saying password management is very important was a bit of a surprise for me. This is why. But, it makes sense that in a lot of places you can use passwords and a management system does make sense. You just have to be careful with it.
Did you know that power plants are exempt from 1/4 of NERC requirements when those plants use Waterfall's unidirectional security gateways? NERC does not demand that power plants use the gateways, but the regulations recognize the strength of unidirectional protections. The regulations reward sites who use gateways by dramatically reducing the number of security rules for those plants. For details on the exemptions, please download Waterfall's latest report on the NERC standards. You can find the report on the waterfall-security.com website in the Resources tab under eBooks and White Papers.
Another thing that surprised me was patching. The number one security tool that was flagged as most effective by respondents was patch management. Again, is this something to do with industry? Because, the power plants, the railway switching systems that I visit, they have a very hard time patching anything. And it's not because they're missing tools. It's because they need to control change. I mean, every change to the code is a potential threat to safety, to reliability. And so to control that change, they have to test this stuff extensively before they dare patching anything. So the answer that patch management tools are really effective is surprising to me. Do you know what's going on here?
I think this topic is always a touch contentious, especially within OT environments as such. I think if we look at the survey results in general, it shows that people are still veering towards known technologies, known technology controls as such, which includes patching. So it's a known quantity, I guess, something that we're all familiar with in our day-to-day lives. If we take our personal devices, for example, I would imagine that most of us, if not all of us, routinely update our smartphones or the apps upon it. And when the manufacturers release patches and fixes, etc. So with regards to OT, I believe that there is still a place for patch management, but the approach needs to be pragmatic and sustainable as such. It's just not realistic to patch on a weekly basis. So patching activities should be scheduled accordingly, taking into account operational constraints. And as you highlight, some environments just cannot tolerate regular change for a number of reasons. So patching just isn't the right fit, and alternative mitigating controls are needed. This is, prime example. You mentioned the rail environment there, but as another example, if we look at pharmaceuticals, typical production line will consist of machines that produce a batch process as such, and you'll have computers which have been configured and validated as such to produce a consistent result every time. Now, if you were to change the configuration of that machine, i.e. a computer, a Windows computer, then guess what? You need to revalidate it, and validation in pharmaceutical is not something that's done in half an hour. It's something that has to be done in a logical and systematic manner, and sometimes it can take days. You have to prove that you can produce a consistent result time and time again. So again, back to your example, patching in these environments just isn't practical. So you have to look at alternatives, and application allow listing is something that we're seeing more of nowadays, which allows you to just install it, have a known baseline for that configuration, and then just go from there. And if a company chooses to install updates, then they can during perhaps shutdowns or in between batch processes, or when they have a maintenance window that allows it as such. But again, I stress the importance of just being pragmatic with patching, and there are, of course, industries and systems that can tolerate change as such. So it's not so much of an issue, but yeah, it's just finding that right balance, really.
In the same theme, the survey predicts that central management of patches and firewalls, and central management, is going to be a huge improvement in the near future. Can you talk about this? Are we talking about central management on sort of an OT WAN? Are we talking about central management from an IT place? Are we talking about central management from the cloud? Because think about it, just stay on the patch example. A patch is a change to the code. We're reprogramming the control system when we apply a patch. If we're doing this in a cloud provider across the internet, the question that I see critical infrastructures asking themselves is, how many machines on the internet should be able to reprogram my railway switching system or the safety systems in my refineries? The answer is generally none. What are you talking about? But central management is machines on the internet that are authorized to reprogram your control system. So, how can central management work? Or, are we not talking about critical infrastructure here? Are we talking about consumer goods or something like this, where, the biggest consequence is not meeting your, not meeting your production quota for washing machines or something? What's going on with this central management thing?
Okay, so to clarify, and I think you touched on it at the beginning there, your description. When we say central management, we're talking about centralized security services as such, and they're generally, and in most cases, I would hope, provided from infrastructure that's hosted within an organization's own network perimeter. So not the cloud. And centralized management, it makes a lot of sense, especially on bigger OT estates. And if we follow the example of patch management, you can essentially deploy a centralized model which allows you to patch all of your OT Windows endpoints, for example, in a controlled manner, and providing it's implemented in a correct way, it's very safe to do so. I mean, obviously you've got technology controls, but you also have to support those technology controls with robust procedural controls. So we don't want people pushing down patches. We're not advocating that you should push down patches to OT endpoints and then just install them automatically. There needs to be an end-to-end approach where patches are retrieved, they're pulled down by or pushed down to the machines, and then the actual installation of those patches is manually instigated by the sites and stuff like that, rather than automatically installed. We don't advise direct connections from OT endpoints to the internet or cloud for patch updates, for example, and it's not something that we would definitely recommend. But typical infrastructures that we see out in the field is that you would have, if we take the Windows Server Update Service architecture as an example here, so WSUS. A common architecture model for this is where you would have machines on the corporate network which are pulling down the relevant patches from Microsoft, or the validated patches from the actual machine vendors themselves. The big vendors typically verify their patches these days to ensure that they're safe to install. Then those patches would then be cascaded down to downstream servers that are serving OT environments as such. So typically those servers will be placed in like your demilitarized zone, your buffer zone, which then serves those environments as such. So you don't have a direct connection from your OT endpoints sat within your critical infrastructure up to your corporate network as such. So it's kind of a cascaded approach. The other one you mentioned was about the centralized management of firewalls, and again, this is where we have clients or many industries now will follow like the Purdue model of or the ISA model of placing firewall between your IT and your OT environments. This is kind of like a bit of a security 101 there for OT security as such. So having the centralized management of those firewalls is something that we're seeing more and more of now, and it makes a lot of sense to have that central view and to be able to administer all of those firewalls, especially in a large company where you might have a geographically dispersed estate of firewalls. And what's also good about this is with the advancement of next generation firewalls, we're seeing more and more security capabilities like IDS and some IPS that have been added into the mix here as well, which are useful additions to provide additional layers of security as well on the traffic that's flowing north-south.
So Nate, those results in the survey, they still surprise me. I mean, in my experience, most OT security rules in sort of mature organizations, the OT security rules are stronger than the rules that are applied to IT systems because the consequences on the OT side are so much worse than, worst case consequences on the IT side. And here's the thing. If IT tools can cripple OT. Take, for example, the firewall manager. If you have a firewall manager on the IT network and someone steals a password and logs in and tells all of the OT firewalls to stop sending anything through, well, now you've used an IT system to cripple operations. What that means is that really your central management IT resources that have these very powerful capabilities, they need to be managed by the same security rules as you manage your OT systems, the much more demanding security rules. And in my understanding of the industry and my talking to people in these industries, they do not want the OT, the sort of the stronger OT security rules to creep into the IT space and complicate their lives on the IT space. So again, I'm surprised by the strength of support for central management here. I don't know what's going on.
I do agree with one of the findings in the report, the importance of central security monitoring, and the importance of practiced incident response teams. The thing that confuses me, I mean, in critical infrastructures, fundamentally we can only optimize what we measure. So we better be measuring our security status if we want to optimize it, and most of us do. And if an incident happens, we'd better be able to respond. What I found confusing in the report is that it talks about the importance of monitoring almost like it was more important than preventing compromise. On IT networks, ransomware hits, detect, respond, recover is what you need. You identify the affected machines, you isolate them, you erase them, you restore from backup, repeat. It's vital. This is what you do. The problem on OT networks is that, we cannot restore lost lives or damaged equipment from backups. So what's going on here? Why is central monitoring so important? I mean, is this again the IT bias?
I think it's another good observation. So to clarify, we put a more forward-thinking focus on the report, and this focus is also carried through in the recommendations that we made within the report. So I think most people reading the report are operating in OT security already and probably aware of the basics in relation to protective controls like the ones you mentioned, like network segmentation, security zoning, conduits, etc. So with that in mind, all of the recommendations are intended to offer capabilities that build upon the basics and form the next generation of OT security as such.
Another topic in the report was zero trust, trusting local resources just as little as we trust resources on the other side of the internet. Encryption is the answer. What was the question? But does this really work on OT networks? I mean, if the encryption certificate on a critical programmable logic controller, if that certificate expires because we, forgot or for some reason couldn't update with a new certificate, is the control system really going to stop using that PLC? What does zero trust mean on control networks?
Yeah, it's a good observation, and again, it's something which is still a maturing area in the OT environment. So, at a high level, zero trust is built upon the concepts of trust nothing can verify all, essentially. So there's no trusted source, right? So effectively, no device, user, system should be trusted by default, regardless of if it's inside or outside of your security perimeter as such. So, as mentioned earlier, we're all seeing the increased prevalence of greater connectivity between users and systems. For example, remote working. People are using their own devices like smartphones or tablets to access OT environments, systems, and the data within those environments as well, from essentially anywhere that has an internet connectivity. So with that backdrop in mind, we believe zero trust concepts will be needed to better secure OT environments in the future. Now, we're still in the infancy of zero trust within OT, as I mentioned, but we are seeing parts of its theory and mantra being implemented by our clients, like micro-segmentation, for example, which can be effectively achieved with more traditional and current technologies as such. So just as way of a clarification, micro-segmentation looks at specifically securing traffic moving east-west between systems and applications within your environment, not the focus has traditionally been on your north-south stuff that's going in and out, but this also looks at east-west. So that's one point, and I think micro-segmentation is definitely seen as a foundational first steps and tentative first steps, I should say, certainly within OT and into implementing a zero trust strategy. Just to go back to your PLC question, though, and I think it's quite hard to answer that one because currently I'm not aware of any well-known PLC or manufacturer that supports authentication technologies in the way that they function, process commands, and also how they communicate. So you or I, or say another system, sends a command to a PLC, and it basically does it without authenticating or who sent the command as such. So that I think there's a bigger issue here that needs to be addressed before we see zero trust down at that PLC level that you mentioned here. So manufacturers will need to fundamentally change the way their systems operate and are architected as such, to fully embrace zero trust within OT. And it goes back to the old mantra of secure by design at this level. Whether there's an appetite for it from manufacturers to do something about it, I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced there is at the moment, but who knows? We may be pleasantly surprised in the short to medium future.
All right, we've really been blowing through a few different topics in this episode, Andrew.
We have. I mean, it's a big report. There was a lot of topics in it. There's a lot of topics we didn't even get to. For example, a couple of the findings, the biggest worry that OT security managers have is the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks. There's a whole section in the report on supply chain. More people are auditing their software suppliers more and more frequently. And this is presumably because of the more sophisticated attacks targeting supply chains that we've seen recently, like SolarWinds and Kaseya. So there's a lot there. So Serkan, this has been very good. Thank you for joining us. Before we let you go, is there a thought you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Yes. So firstly, I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity to talk with you and your listeners today. I've really enjoyed it. With regards to final thoughts, I'd say the survey results indicate that there is a strong and positive desire to do more in this space, and that's good to see and encouraging for the future. We may do another exercise like this in a few years' time. It would definitely be interesting to see how things develop over the next sort of 3 to 4 years as such. So I also think the survey respondents and their respective organisations recognise that they're still not at a comfortable place when it comes to OT cybersecurity and risk mitigation. So in essence, it appears there's still work to be done across the board here, and I think that's well known and acknowledged. I think deciding to do something about it and embarking on that OT security journey can be quite a daunting prospect. So, where do you start? How far do you go with it? These are all common reasons for not doing anything. It's often a reason to put stuff off, but doing nothing really isn't the solution in this instance as such. So, with that in mind, people should reach out to the community. There are great minds and companies that can help you. And also on that note, if you'd like any further information on anything I've spoken about or any clarifications from the report, then please do get in contact with us. We're happy to help. And one last thing, if you'd like to download the full report, it's available under the resources section of our website at www.applied-risk.com.
Andrew, you got any thoughts to close us out?
Yeah, let me say that I was surprised by some of the findings. Serkan spoke to some of the questions I had, but sort of pondering the whole episode, pondering the report, I have to wonder if some of my confusion is not who are the people who are responding to the report. I mean, the report says there was a 60-40 split in respondents. 60% were from IT teams, 40% were from OT teams. Or maybe it was the industry focus of the respondents because, I work more with critical infrastructures than I do with consumer goods manufacturing. And, the different industries tend to have, somewhat different priorities. But what I will say is that I was very encouraged by the report. There were 1,000 people that responded to the report. So, in my books, that's a lot of people in this space. It's a small space. So it's encouraging that there's that kind of widespread interest in OT security and in participating in, learning more about the state of OT security. So that was good news.
All right. Well, then thanks to Serkan Yusuf for showing all this data to us. And thank you, Andrew, for speaking with me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Nate.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everyone listening.